Greetings, wonder children. Welcome to Concordia University class number 30 for March 18th, 2020. This is what we're doing now. So let me explain what these videos are for. They're in lieu of class. I'm going to try to keep this shorter than a traditional class period, our normal class period, but I do want to try to keep in some of my fun things, which students have historically said are fun. So first of all, how this works. So I'll be posting assignments for every single one of these class periods. So they'll direct you to my blog where I'll have posted this video on YouTube for you to watch. And then there'll be a submission requirement for each of these class periods. Essentially, what you should do is take notes and be watchful for the secret word, or listen for the secret word, because I'm probably not going to display it. So you put the secret word at the top of your notes. So the secret word for today was, so that a quick check, I can see that you got the secret word, and then you have notes. If you take amazing notes, I may give you bonus points, but there'll be points associated with each class period for the rest of the semester, just to verify that you're here. Is pretty much all I could figure out to do. So there's that. As I mentioned in the announcement yesterday, grading is happening, but I'm probably going to finish up all of our grading over spring break because right now I'm pushing hard to a deadline this coming Monday, the 23rd, for completing all my LCC stuff, which is an enormous amount of research projects, which maybe I'll show you on Friday. I'm not going to reach for the stack right now. But I will get all that graded. I will soon post the assignment for the final essay, which will be a comparison contrast between Watchmen and Binti. I recommend that once you finish the Culture Jam project, you read those. Unfortunately, we're not together so that I can start you on Binti with the audiobook as I like to do, but I strongly encourage you to listen to the audiobook, and I'll talk about these works in future class periods. Also, a reminder that at the end of the semester you collect works in a portfolio. So this assignment will be loaded soon to Blackboard as well. Portfolio will contain the final revision of Essay 1 and a revision of one of the other essays on which you want to raise your grade, which typically is the Culture Jam project because it's the one that's worth the most points, but it's certainly up to you which one you want to choose. You get some points back the previous assignment, so if you only get, say, 130 out of 200 points on the Culture Jam project, that's probably going to be a motivator to redo that one, and you get some of those 70 points you lost back. I have kind of a formula for that, which I'll share with you. The exam, as you now know, will also be online. I'm going to do away with testing you on the words because there's really no good way to do that online. Instead, I'm going to have you post a list of the words showing that you had accumulated them. So the more class periods you attended, obviously the more words you will have in that list. And then the exam will be mostly short answer and one or two longer essays that you would be able to finish in about 2 hours, like you would in the actual exam period in the classroom. So those are the things. So today I want to start with a couple of my things. The next poet that I was going to read you, a poem by her, is Anne Sexton, who's is a really wonderful poet who also unfortunately killed herself and was actually a little dismayed that Sylvia Plath killed herself first. They were kind of pen pals. They corresponded with each other, and it was sort of almost a competition for who would kill herself first, who is the most mentally ill, which I don't want to make light of mental illness or suicide, but it is a little comical. Anyway, I decided to pick a poem that I've never read before for today's poem to kind of go with the events of the world and to give you the secret word, which is, and I guess I am going to show it, although it's backwards from what I can see, so I don't know if this is working. It's frenzy. Frenzy, F-R-E-N-Z-Y is today's secret word. So this is Frenzy by Anne Sexton. I am not lazy. I am on the amphetamine of the soul. I am, each day, typing out the God my typewriter believes in. very quick, very intense, like a wolf at a live heart, not lazy. When a lazy man, they say, looks toward heaven, the angels close the windows. O angels, keep the windows open so that I may reach in and steal each object. Objects that tell me the sea is not dying. Objects that tell me the dirt has a life wish. That the Christ who walked for me walked on true ground. And that this frenzy, like bees stinging the heart all morning, will keep the angels with their windows open, wide as an English bathtub. So, Frenzy by Anne Sexton from her book, um, The Awful Rowing Toward God, 1975. Um, Hope you enjoyed it. Also, in keeping with my book recommendation deal, and I was hoping to keep this under 5 minutes, but with announcements, I'm going slightly over, is a book I just finished by Rainbow Rowell called Fangirl, which is just incredible. Just a fantastic book. And the audiobook for it was incredible. I've gone on to the first in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. And the audio narrator for that is not anywhere near as good as this audio narrator, so it's really affecting my enjoyment of that. Though I'm trying and I have an open mind, since so many people love Brandon Sanderson. But I had originally been recommended to read Carry On, the first books about Simon Snow, and I started that, and it was extremely derivative of Harry Potter. And I was a little concerned because I know Rainbow Rowell. She's currently writing Runaways for Marvel, and I also read Eleanor and Park a few years ago, which is a really great book. And so I found out that Simon Snow comes from this book about a character named Kath Avery, who writes fan fiction about this thing called Simon Snow in the Mage's Heir, which is obviously derivative of Harry Potter on purpose, since she probably wanted to make it a girl that writes fan fiction about Harry Potter, but couldn't. Her main thing, the writer of the fan fiction, is to make the two main characters of the book gay because of all the gay subtext in the original stories by the author. Very, very much in relationship to Harry Potter. So this book is about Kath going to college. She lives in Nebraska. She writes fan fiction, but she meets a fiction professor who tries to encourage her to actually write original work, and she has a really hard time with that. Her mother left her when she was very young, and she was brought up by her father. She has a twin sister. She meets this boy, blah, blah, blah. It's a young adult book, but it was so well written and so amazing, and I'm actually very sad that it's over. But I strongly recommend it, and Rainbow Rowell, amazing. All right, so I have notes for today's class period. So let me talk a little bit about the Culture Jam project that you're currently working on. So you should think about the length for the entire project somewhere between 50 and 40 pages. I know that just freaked you out, so let me say it again more slowly. 15 and 40, because that was the range I had last semester. One student produced, actually, it was 42-page Culture Jam project. I think that might have been the total text, including the works cited page and the cover page and all of that, though I'm not sure. It was pretty close to 40 pages of body text. The average length last semester was about 19 pages total, and that is just body text, not including works cited and title page and that sort of thing. It's supposed to be long. So I purposely didn't put length requirements on there because I found that if I give you the length requirement, students often just write to the minimum and then stop. For instance, one of the length requirements last semester for one of the parts was just 2 paragraphs. And so I consistently just got 2 paragraphs, which really was completely inadequate to address the content. Minimums are always set low, and so excuse me, that didn't really work at all. This also gets you to see, some of my coffee cups. I love my wife coffee cup. So I would aim for, between 15 and 20 pages on this. Today I want to mainly talk about what is the second part. But the goal of this is to do a longer project that sets you up for future courses that tackle big research projects, which is kind of what I'm doing at LCC right now. I have students that did this project in the same class at LCC, which is the basic composition, and then they go on to the research paper writing project, in which the minimum is 12 pages of text. That's what I would aim for. So the idea behind this project is that you should think of it as 3 essays that are linked together thematically by the introduction. The introduction is meant to be a multi-paragraph introduction, which is why I encourage you to, not encourage you, more or less required you to imitate Kelly Lassen's Culture Jam introduction. Look at the parts, and do the same thing. So I walked you through that a little bit on Friday when we last had class, but I may talk about it a little bit more in the next video, because I would expect that even though the project is due Friday, that all of you, if not maybe most of you, will take the extended deadline for after spring break. So I'll continue to talk about the Culture Jam project for a little while. So think about it that way. You have 3 essays of different lengths. The second part on revolutionary impulse should be the longest of those 3. The second part, or after that, which is called part 3 in the instructions, that combines the summaries with media experiences, which I'll talk about more on Friday, is probably the second longest, and then the last part is the third, the smallest but still substantial. I would aim for 5-paragraph essay with that, right? So that the others obviously are longer, and that's where you get close to 20 pages. So jam it out. That's that's where we're headed. So, of course, extensions will be available if you don't get it done for the class period after spring break, which is the 30th, I think. I actually have a calendar handy right here where I can look up that date. Yes, the 30th indeed. So you can ask for an extension if you need it, but we're not going to have a lot of time to play with. So I'll talk about that some more in a little while. So that's one thing to think about. And I would really write the introduction last, because till you've written the other parts, it's difficult to figure out how to tie them together thematically, right? So I want to talk about the what's called the second part, which is what I want you workshopping today. But I had a feeling that not everybody would have jumped in there yet. I haven't checked the discussion board to see if there's any postings there at all. I thought this would come as a timely thing, and that even if it didn't, you'd be revising and you'd be working on that to complete it. It's kind of funny that as I look at the clock right now, it's at 10 a.m., which is the time I always post my blog, where I'll be posting this in a little while. So I'm up at 13 minutes, so I'm okay. I'm going to try to finish this out. So the goal of the revolutionary impulse section is the main goal is to analyze it using the rhetorical triangle. And so I presented presented that in class. I shared the blog entry that I put some resources together on that. I just updated that this morning because the last text section in that related to doing speech presentations using the rhetorical triangle, which I thought that text was relevant, but not all of it, and I hadn't explicitly mentioned that in the blog entry, so I changed that so that was explicitly listed. So the main goal of the section is to analyze the chapter using the rhetorical triangle and how well Callie Lassen does with that. And then beyond that, to expand on some of the ideas contained within that chapter and do what I call riffing. And just investigating and sharing outside of the analysis on your own as you complete out that section. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about how you might analyze this section using the rhetorical triangle, and then kind of walk through the chapter and look at key lines and ideas, and maybe even point out, where I think some of these things are operating. So a reminder, and I don't have any visuals, so apologies for that. I'll work on my technique here. Is ethos, pathos, and logos, right? So if we remember, from the triangle, and you look at the blog and see I post a lot of visuals that show the different things. And of course, I think I can just look at it myself on my screen without doing anything to the video display. I've never tried that before. So ethos is the speaker. Ethos is the way the speaker presents the material, and questions of credibility, questions of trustworthiness, questions of how the speaker communicates. Pathos is for the audience. It's the way to connect with the audience. It's the emotional connection that the message makes with the audience and inspires emotions within the audience. And that's a common ground sort of an element in persuasive writing, that if you're going to persuade your audience, you have to find the common ground, the emotional connection that you share with the audience. For example, the example I often use is someone writing about gun violence. And no matter what position people take on gun violence, usually, I haven't found anyone that disagrees. Everyone agrees that we don't want to see people shot and killed, particularly little elementary school children. And so, that is, a clear common ground that connects the people that may disagree with me arguing for heightened gun control. They agree about that, right? So we can connect the audience together. So we look at that in here as well, in terms of how Kelly Lassen did that. Does he have emotional appeals? Does he connect with you? Does he establish common ground? And then lastly is logos, and logos is the message itself. So we have the communicator, ethos, the audience, pathos, excuse me, and then the message itself is logos, or is typified by logos. And so that's how the message uses reasoning to make its case and convince you of what it's trying to argue. And granted, this chapter is not as strong an argument, say, as the Jolts chapter or the Meme Wars chapter. It does have that same sort of structure in a sense of problem and then a call to action at the end. But it's different than the others. The problem isn't necessarily quite as clear as Jolts or as memes. And the call to action is quickly handled. Unlike, particularly in the Jolts section, it had a pretty substantial section on the solution, the call to action, right? So that's the scene here. Okay, so start out. So since this is the first body section after the introduction, you don't have to do any transition or linking from the previous section. You have to do that in the other two sections, where you have to link these together with your text, linking the ideas in how you write about what you're writing about. But with this section, you can pretty much just dive right in to the content. And the first thing, obviously, you want to do is establish context and a quick overview of the chapter. So it's not a bad idea to once again mention the name of the book and the author. That's really relevant to what we're writing about. Even though you'll definitely have that pretty much in the first paragraph of your introduction of the entire project, right? You can't not mention that. That's what we're writing about. So that's got to be in there. So establish context. What are we reading? Give me a quick overview of the chapter. What is it about? And then establish a thesis at the end of that first paragraph of this section. Does Kelly Lassen effectively use rhetorical triangle to make his case? So that's your point, and maybe add some of the other things that you're going to get into that are key ideas that you riff on. Or is he somewhat successful? Like he's really good at ethos, you like how he writes, you think he's credible, but he fails at pathos. There's not enough pathos connection here for you. But he's okay at logos. You could be kind of in between there. Or you think he fails entirely. You don't think he uses any of these elements of the rhetorical triangle well, and he fails. Now, often I don't want to tell you what I think because I want to let you free to do your own thing. Um, but I will tell you that honestly, I think he does very well with all three of these things. The pathos part is not super obvious, but I'll go over it and where I think it is. So I'm basically going to hand you what you could write about, but I certainly want you to explore your own ideas about this. So don't feel like you have to just regurgitate my ideas back to me. That's never what I want. So that's how I would start this out. And I said pathos is not obvious, so I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes. So let's start with ethos. I think that is the most prevalent in the section. So who is Callie Lassen? You know, um, dig into who this person is. Look up some information online. This would be a place to cite an outside source, though probably not one with an author, and you need 4 outside sources with authors plus adbusters, but maybe you could bring in adbusters here. Though I do also want you looking at the actual Culture Jam content on adbusters. But, is he credible? Does he write in a credible way? How does he write? Show me some of the writing and analyze it, quote it, and talk about it. You write about it. Like describe it, analyze it. And I'll go through the text in a minute, kind of point out some of these places. And then logos would be next, in my opinion. Is it well reasoned? Does he prove his case? How does he prove his case? Which means you have to define what the case is that he's trying to prove with this section. And does he and how he? And again, show me. Point. When we analyze, and I'm hoping that I'm going to see this in essay 2 on Middlesex. I haven't graded those yet, but I will be. That I see that you're doing this, because it's what you're going to have to do with the next essay with Watchman and Binti. So we're sort of cumulatively developing these skills, right? And then lastly, pathos, I think, is the least obvious of the 3, but it's definitely there. It's definitely there throughout the entire Culture Jam book. So let's do a little walkthrough. I don't know if you're really going to be able to see. I don't think I'm going to hold it up because I have to read from it. I may turn it around and show it to you, but on the screen that I'm seeing, it's backwards. So I don't know if the text is going to show up the right way around. But you could follow along with me. Open up your book to the section, and we could walk through this, right? So he starts off. Most people in the world have never heard of culture jamming, yet it is not a new movement. This is setting up what this is about, because basically it's a history of resistance and activism that's very much like culture jamming, so that he can sort of give you the perspective after all of these pages. We're up to page almost 100, where he's done all of these pages on different ideas. We haven't got to meme wars yet in the section, but we had all that ecology of the mind stuff. And the cult you're in, and post-human, and the Manchurian consumer, and media virus, and all these cool things where he's trying to show you the power of the brainwashing media, right? So he says we place ourselves on a revolutionary continuum that includes moving backward in time, early punk rockers, hippies, the Situationist International, which is mainly what he writes about in the section, Dadaists, Surrealists, Anarchists, and so on, right? He even uses the word pathos at the end of the first paragraph, agitators down through the ages whose chief aim was to challenge the prevailing ethos, that's the world, in a way that was so primal and heartfelt it could only be true, right? So he's trying to inspire you. He's definitely trying to inspire you. And then in the second paragraph, he establishes this common ground. So I think in a small way, he has some pathos starting early on. What we all have in common. I mean, that's obviously common ground. I mean, he more or less uses the words. What we all have in common, besides a belligerent attitude toward authority, is a willingness to take big risks, risks, and a commitment to pursue small, spontaneous moments of truth. So do you buy that? Do we all have that in common? Do you have a negative reaction, a belligerent attitude toward authority? Do you have a willingness to take big risks and a commitment to pursue small, spontaneous moments of truth? I hope so, because I think that's important. I was in Safeway yesterday, walking down the toilet paper aisle where there is no toilet paper at all. And this guy came up to me, and he could see that we were of like mind, so we immediately had common ground because both of our carts were not heaping to overflowing with 45 cans of lima beans. And he started talking about the sheeple. The sheeple are going crazy. The sheeple are in a feeding frenzy. And he talked about how he actually confronted one of these hoarders in line the other day at the grocery store and made a joke about buying a lot of tortillas to use as toilet paper, and then you could have like a poo burrito, or he's a weird joke about it. Couldn't remember exactly what he said, but we immediately had common ground. And we were very much in opposition, both of us, to this hoarding that's going on, because we want to find these spontaneous moments of truth with people, because we're going to survive this current situation. We have to all work together, which is the message right now on CNN, over and over and over again. And I really appreciate that about CNN. So. Early on in this chapter, he's establishing I think his ethos. He comes off the writing. I could point to some of the language that he has here in terms of how the writing works. Though I think there might be some better examples later for ethos in terms of writing. He establishes common ground. He's using logic. He's trying to use some logic because he's using history. So he's saying that there's a history to this. There's lots of people that have tried to fight the power, to take the power back, to fight against the status quo. And so since this is not a new thing, it makes it more authentic and real. And then he has this great quote that I quoted in class Friday by Czesław Miłosz. In a small room where people unanimously maintain a conspiracy of silence, one word of truth sounds like a pistol shot. In other words, people are not, and so this is incredible ethos here, but it's also it's I think all three, because it's meant to inspire an emotional reaction in you, and yet it's logical. In a world in which people are not talking about this, in which people are just passively, because they're stuck at home binging television shows, which is exactly what's talked about in this passage, in this section, the programmed entertainments that are presented for them. That if one person speaks out against this, that sounds like a pistol shot. It's dramatic and life changing. And this is the kind of way I want you to write about this stuff. The way I'm talking. Even if you don't agree with me and you're taking the other position, which is fine. But I want you to write in this true, real way and find a voice, So where logos is concerned, in the very next page, page 100, at the top, he invokes Greil Marcus's book about called Lipstick Traces, that talks about the Sex Pistols and Johnny Rotten as a rebel seer. And Johnny Rotten is still alive. Sid Vicious is the heroin addict that died tragically. Check that story out. Here'd be a place to riff if you wanted to riff. But if you do look up information on the Sex Pistols and write about that, you have to connect it to what you're writing about. And of course, you don't want to break up your rhetorical analysis with extra information that's not relevant at the time. Maybe a little bit, but more of that riffing after you've analyzed, right? But then, what do you get out of looking up more information about the Sex Pistols? But I really like the stuff here, that the Sex Pistols want to explode that dreamy Beatles-fueled optimism. It's like the line from The Clash, that phony Beatlemania has bitten the dust, which is in London Calling, probably their most famous song. Maybe not their most well-known song, but maybe their best song. So check that out. He's got all sorts of good stuff here. I love this idea that the Sex Pistols wanted to be um, the subject of the story, not necessarily the object of the story. And here's a place where you could analyze, and I'm not going to give you it all away. What does that mean? What does that mean? Um, so then, more history. The punks were like the hippies, the yippies, the beats, the anarchists, etc. He writes about spirit of anarchy, and how the media spectacle slowly corrodes the human psyche. Bottom of page 100. And so then he starts talking about the situationists, and obviously we have a lot of logos here. He's got, now granted he doesn't have citations. It's not an academic book, but he's bringing in information. He's using historical context to show that the current culture jam movement is very legitimate and necessary and important, just like some of these other movements were necessary and important and were part of our cultural landscape. And the situationists were also part of that cultural landscape that a lot of Americans don't necessarily know about. And so he explains their ideas, which are very much the same as his ideas, and what Culture Jam is dedicated to, right? They want to down with bureaucracies. That situationists were committed to a life of permanent novelty, top of 101. And that's because they wanted to be at adrift, the dérive, which we'll get into in a few minutes. That's on the next page. But situationists is a creator of situations, a performance artist. The performance, of course, is your life, and that's because you got to break out of the spectacle that's been created for you. It talks about how the powers that be, the corporations, have kidnapped our lives. The spectacle they create, and this is a great word for the media landscape and consumerism and all this stuff. It's the spectacle. That's why people can't detach themselves from the Netflix umbilical cord. My wife and I stream things also. I mean, we're not, sticking our heads in the sand. We've been watching a lot of CNN, but sometimes we turn it off, and read, or talk to each other, or she'll tell me about her dream, and we share real human experiences, and that's something we need in our world, right? So there's a great line in here, bottom of page 101. Everything human beings once experienced directly has been turned into a show put on by somebody else. I just think that is so very true, and just ready for you to analyze it and expand on it, right? But this is a great use of logos, and it also has a pathos, underpinning, and I think he does it in a way that evokes ethos. I think it's all three. And so he has a couple of really great examples. Again, logos. Nike's use of the Beatle tune Revolution in advertisements, Apple's appropriation of Bob Dylan, the Gap's mugging of Jack Kerouac, etc., to show how our lives have been stolen. And this idea of appropriation and co-optation is something that I would have taught in more depth in class if we were here today. Appropriation happens when something is appropriated by one group by another group. Most famous example of this is Elvis Presley appropriating rock and roll music from blues and jazz, and primarily created by African American people in America, and repackaging it in a way that white people will find palatable. Same thing happened with hip hop, Eminem being a good example of that. And when that happens, when those cultural things are appropriated, they become co-opted. They lose their power. And you may have heard the term "keeping it real." This is when it's not kept real. Hawaiian Punch, the Hawaiian Punch logo, or Hula Girls, or Big Kahuna, are a bunch of things that have been appropriated from Hawaiian culture. In many cases, that are somewhat sacred, and are not, for co-opting by or appropriating and then co-opting by Howley people. There's more stuff. Page 102. He invokes the film Before Sunrise. He talks about emulators. And then back to Boer, the writer of the Society of Spectacle and the head situationist guy. He was an unheralded visionary. He writes here, compares him to McLuhan. McLuhan wrote about the mass culture trance. Boer wrote about how to break out of it. And so at the bottom of 102, we get this idea of dérive. And dérive literally means the drift. The situationists defined it as locomotion is the goal it's something they borrowed from the Dadaists, which is certainly the Dadaists, surrealists, that could be something to riff on. Look into that. If you don't know what Dadaists are, it's fascinating. Really cool art movement of the early 1920s, mostly in France. So a dériviste floats through the city, open to whatever it comes in contact with that life of novelty and spontaneity, openness, and not creating your own spectacle, taking back your life, not letting these pre-programmed entertainments be the thing that is your life. I recommend pre-programmed entertainments all the time. Even books and poems and things are pre-programmed entertainments. Though I'm trying to, suggest a potpourri, a gallimaufry, if you will, of these different, things. And so then he leads up from dérive to détournement, which is literally take your life back that has been kidnapped from you. Literally turning around is what the word means in French. And I think my French pronunciation is pretty close. I did study French, although I'm not great at it. So there's some great stuff here as well, right? And the bottom of page 103 is where some of you that are strong with your religious convictions may be disturbed by the story from 1950 from Notre Dame. Of someone that got up and delivered a sermon about the Catholic Church and proclaimed that God is dead. And it's not an idea necessarily that I want to promote, but the rebellious nature of why it was done and why it's controversial. And again, if it upsets you, there's pathos. That's very strongly pathos. And so we shouldn't be afraid of ideas like this. Just, somebody did this and he's using it as an example. I think it's a very good example because of the power of it to upset people. So I would look into that if I was writing this, right? So then over on to page 104, he brings up another important book. So we have Lipstick Traces by Greil Marcus. We have The Society of Spectacle by Boer. Then we have The Revolution of Everyday Life by Venigam. And I'm going to try to wrap this up relatively quickly because I can see I'm coming dangerously close to 40 minutes, and I did say it would be shorter than a class period, and it may not end up being that, so I apologize. But some great stuff in there. And then as he is explaining that and the connection between Venigam and Boer, he brings up the postmodern world that we find ourselves in, bottom of page 104. I wrote postmodern on the side, but I didn't actually underline postmodern, so I'm looking for where it is. But that's something to look up and riff on. If you don't know what postmodernism is, that would definitely be something that would be great to explore after your analysis, right? So then he has one of the great lines by Greil Marcus, this democracy of false desire. Now, what do you think that means? Can you analyze that? What does he say about it? So read what he says about it. There's some good stuff here. Spectacle is an instrument of social control, offering the illusion of unlimited choice, but it's an illusion. Some great stuff. And then, Take Back the Show over on page 104, and one of the greatest problems, the biggest enemies of the situationists is boredom. And in the world of today, we should never be bored. I used to work in a video store back when you had to go rent videos. And people, we had hundreds of movies, but all they cared about were the 6 movies that had come out that week. And if we didn't have a copy of that for them, then they were uninterested in the, 600 other movies or even 1,000. I can't remember how many we had in the store. And it was this weird thing about, if it's not new, and if it's not the thing, then I'm not interested in it and I'm bored. And we have so much content in the world today and so many opportunities. I can't understand why anybody would ever be bored. So take back the show. Don't allow your immersion in the spectacle to create this state of boredom in you. The world is too much of a rich place to waste time with feelings like that. Then he writes a little about De Boer as a person, and he never had a job. Page 105. I love this. Quote from De Boer: "I wrote much less than most people who write, but drank much more than people who drink." Now, does that make you like De Boer more, or is that a negative? Does that affect you negatively, and does that bring down the ethos? And then De Boer is less credible. Is that pub philosopher type thing that's much more popular in Europe than here in America? Is that cool, or is that not cool? Curious to see what you'll write. So there's some other stuff. He brings in Maslow. And then starting page 106, I think is really where he kicks into the main pathos of the section, where he shares a personal experience about Satori and him doing this documentary on Zen Buddhists. And he was at a Zen monastery in Kamakura. And he had to do what the Buddhists did, the monks did, if he was going to be able to make the documentary, which was meditate for a really long time. He had been challenged to meditate. I'm losing 2 full days for 2 full days, and he describes the experience. His muscles cramping, his joints stiffening, painful experience. But then what he learned from it, and if this doesn't reach you on an emotional level, I would ask why. You know, can you put yourself in this guy's shoes? Does he write in such a way that makes you put yourself in his shoes? Because he likens this experience to crawling out of your warm bed in a dark room one December morning at 5 a.m. and plunging into a tub of ice water. This is what this sort of shift from leaving the spectacle creates in us. And like I told you about my student that reacted very negatively to these ideas, and we should just be happy with the way things are, which I think is an argument he'd make right now, given what's going on with the coronavirus and the pandemic. He did not absorb. He did not internalize Lassen's message, because if he had, he would have broken out of the spectacle, and he would have this like peak experience, which is like an ice bath, right? So then he writes about breaking the trance. I love this on page 107, breaking the old syntax, which is a line from De Boer. It's breaking the language itself, the way we talk about our experiences, and trying to come up with new language. Syntax is language, a whole new way of being in the world. And so, some great stuff in here to follow that up on a perceptual shift. Then he invokes the Truman Show. Then he tells a story about Buddha, the actual story of Buddha, glimpsing the real world from beyond the palace walls, which is also an attempt to connect with you on common ground and emotionally, and inspire interest in Buddhism. And Buddhism is something that can work very much in tandem with any world religion. There's a lot of Christians who really find association with Buddhism. I have a really great book that compares the 3 great religious icons, Christ, Muhammad, and Buddha. and the similarities between their messages. And there's lots of similarities between the messages of those three great religious leaders. And so that could be something where you could riff. Excuse me, especially if you're uh, religious, and that's of interest to you. And I'm not coughing because I have coronavirus. I'm coughing because I have phlegm. Um, so, midway down 108, the détournement of the right sign in the right place at the right time could spark a mass reversal of perspective, said Greil Marcus. Everyone would see through it. That it's like, don't ignore the man behind the curtain. The whole Wizard of Oz trope, right? Um, and So then he wraps it up, and this last part is definitely a call to action because he's arguing that we could have a revolution. In the very end, he writes, the situationists maintain that ordinary people have all the tools they need for revolution. The only thing missing is a perceptual shift, a tantalizing glimpse of a new way of being that suddenly brings everything into focus, where you have some sort of a revelatory experience, which is very much like religious experiences, So there could be something on which you could riff as well. So there's lots of stuff to explore beyond the rhetorical analysis, but I kind of walked you through a lot of the parts in which you can write about that, but gave you, I feel, enough room that you can deal with it on your own. And a reminder: today's secret word is frenzy. Put that at the top of your notes. Share as many notes as you felt are reasonable to share to show that you paid attention to this video. I'm sorry this is so long. I'll try to make sure some of the others are shorter, but we're pretty much at a full class period here. So thanks for watching, and I'll post the next video either tomorrow, Thursday, or at the very least, latest Friday morning. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.